What's up, David, man? Welcome to Dad Edge, brother.
Thank you for having me, Larry.
Oh, you bet, man. I'm excited to talk about this topic. I'm excited to talk about your book. But before we get started, I want to just start out and level set with what your family looks like: marriage, kids, whole nine yards, where you from, what you do.
Absolutely, Larry. Well, Memorial Day weekend, I would have told you that I've got a beautiful bride, which I do, Jessica, and I've got two boys, which I do, Kane and Knox. But I used to wear a dad bracelet, boy dad bracelet. But right after Memorial Day weekend, I met a precious little girl who just turned 10 named Isabella. So I've got a new addition to the family. And 2 weeks ago, I took her to the daddy-daughter dance. So she's been such a blessing.
Well, hang on. I love how you just like breeze right over that way. You've got to tell that story. I did not
Yeah,
know
man,
that.
it's an amazing God story. At the very end of the book, we talk about the 3-year plan. I want to be 3 minutes, 3 minutes, be present with you, Larry, and then 3 years. I don't want to worry about lunch or dinner or tomorrow, worry about self. I want to be present today and then fast forward 3 years. And 3 years ago, God put on my heart that we will be ready to receive a little girl in the next 3 years. And right before, literally days before a Saturday first foster training for my wife and I, the doors opened for this precious little girl whose mom had passed away about a year and a half ago, unfortunately, of an OD. And the grandmother was a distant relative of my wife's. And God just moved through all these moving parts, tough situation for this precious little girl. And we just answered the call, man. We were ready to receive, and she's been such a blessing for us.
Wow. That's unreal. So I'm curious though. Do you mind if we talk about this a little further?
Yeah, no, not at all. Let's do it.
So, and how old are the boys?
The boys are almost 10 and almost 7, and Isabella just turned 7 or 10. She just turned 10, so she's the
So
oldest.
So 10, 10, 7. Okay. So I'm just asking you this out of sheer selfish uh, curiosity. There was a moment when we had two boys and we wanted more, but doctors told us at the time we couldn't have any more. So we entertained adoption. And, we actually entertained adopting a girl, right? And one of the things that was on just our mind as we were exploring that option, and then we ended up getting pregnant with a boy. So it was kind of like an idea, and then it went away after we miraculously got pregnant, even though the doctor told us we couldn't. And but for a moment there, we were like, if we bring in, a girl or a boy, it kind of didn't matter, but my wife really wanted a girl. But even if we, whatever, right? If we bring somebody else into this family that wasn't, birthed into this family, I don't know how the other way to put it, will that be a good thing for our family dynamics, or will the kids be scratching their heads? And the interesting thing is my two older ones were right around that age as your boys. And we were like, man, like they're right at that age where they really know what's going on and they know the difference and it's going to impact them. Some things are probably going to be good and some things might be confusing. But I'm really just curious as to, did you guys have that conversation, with the boys, and then after the fact, what are the dynamics like now?
Yeah, no, it's Larry, you nailed it. A dear friend of mine who actually made the introduction to the attorney to go through this process with us, he said, Dave, I'm so excited. You guys will be great parents, but I have to encourage you and warn you to not change the family dynamic. Your standards at home, your boundaries at home, your rules at home that you have for the boys need to be the same for this little girl. She needs to come into your house. You don't go into hers. And so it's been not easy, Larry. We're not called for life to be easy. It hasn't been easy, but it's been more beautiful and more peaceful than I even expected. My boys give pushback at times if rules aren't 100% followed, but it's almost more like sibling rivalry. They have come into like this protective mode over her, where occasionally they'll tell on her because they don't understand why she's not following the rules, but she also doesn't know the rules. And so I think
Yeah.
we've done a good job of following the rules and keeping them the same and fair for all three kids. And to be honest, Larry, my boys have shown this like unconditional love and grace for this little girl that I always hoped they would have, and I always like believe that they had in them, where they're more gentle and they're almost protective of her. And so, yeah, nothing's perfect by any means. We're not called for it to be, but she fits right in. Like I said, she asked about the daddy daughter dance. My boys are happy to see that. They're starting to call her their sister. She's starting to call my wife and I mom and dad. So it's actually probably gone better than we would have expected. That was actually my concern. And I have to give my wife all the credit. She's just slid right in. She has so many meetings and appointments to, for tutoring and doctor appointments to just kind of get things to where we would want them to be for her to have the best life with us. But my wife's done an amazing job. But the boys have kind of just slid into this new role too, where there's peace in the house, there's joy. And honestly, if you didn't know, like if you came to my house tonight, not knowing my situation, I just said I've got 3 kids, you'd be like, oh yeah, they're great. They bicker a little bit like boys and girls, but like brothers and sisters. But it's actually probably gone better than I could have expected.
Well, I am going to be there tonight. You invited me to dinner before we hit record. So, right?
Come on over.
My boys do eat a lot. So cook a lot if you guys don't mind. No, dude, I honestly, that's really, really incredible. And the fact that the dynamics are like that, I'm curious before we move on now, because you just got my curiosity juices just rolling. Yeah. This little girl calling you dad, like, number one, that's my number one question. How does that impact you? And being a dad of all boys, there are certain things that you leave on the table, right, when you have all boys. And one of those is like, my wife asked me, she's like, you're never going to be able to take a daughter to a daddy-daughter dance. You're never going to be able to take your daughter out on a date. You're never going to be able to walk a woman down the aisle. And I'm like, ooh, yeah, that stings a little, right? So I'm curious, this little girl calling you dad, going to your first daddy-daughter dance, shining your firearms up before these guys start knocking on the doors in a few years. Like, yeah, how does that, tell me about that?
Yeah, man. Larry, here's the thing. I had kind of come to terms with no daddy daughter dance. I'd come to terms with not walking a little girl down the aisle. I'd come to terms with, not being that protector and just having boys, because that was more than enough. My boys mean the world to me. At the same time, Larry, this unconditional love there was opening weekend when she came down to visit with us that I was really cautious and scared. I'm like, this is a stranger. I don't know how to act. Very quickly, I had to make sure that boxers weren't enough to walk around the house. I got sweatpants on. I got a t-shirt on. I'm fully clothed. Versus my boys. My boys were walking around like, maybe they put on underwear that day. Maybe the little one forgets. And so there was some rules that, all kidding aside, we had to like flip on a dime and pivot. But there was a few things opening weekend where I'm like, wait, I've never had a little girl in my house, right? Like, I don't even know how to talk to her. I was almost like a brand new dad, like that first day you take your son home and you're like 10 and 2. And now you're like, oh yeah, is my kid in the car? Is he not? So some of it's just natural, I think. And I know you would do a beautiful job. At the same time, I had a piece that if it's the 2 boys and there's never a girl, I'm good. But I also was open to receive. We were thinking it'd be the normal adoption process, like you said. We never saw this coming, but when we were ready for it, we were ready for it. And so the best answer I can give is after about a week or 2, when I realized it was real and we weren't giving her back, then Larry was just, okay, just cover her with love, drop your guard, and just follow her lead. We took them to the amusement park over the summer, and I didn't hear Isabella say this, but she was in the back with my boys, Kane and Knox, and my wife said, babe, she just called you dad. I didn't hear it. She's far away. She's like, dad, dad. And I was like, really? And she's like, yeah. I'll tell you this. One of my dear friends is a NASCAR driver, and he has this big charity kickball tournament that was last Thursday. And we went in there with a new team that I put together, and we knocked them off, and we won the whole thing. And we're good friends, so I'm sure he was a good sport with it. I know he was. When I got home that night, this big Dale Earnhardt statue.
No, I was just going to ask you who the NASCAR guy was.
Corey LaJoy. Corey LaJoy.
Okay. Got it.
He's a great guy. When I came home with the statue, big Dale Earnhardt statue that he's had in his house for the last 3 years running, Isabella wrote me this beautiful note saying, congratulations, you're the best dad ever. You're the dad I always prayed for. I'm so grateful to have you. And then, Larry, I just
come on.
I knew it was just the best thing ever. But then my little boy, Larry, my youngest of the 2, Knox, I go in the other room, try not to cry. Knox comes in a minute later with a 6-year-old version of, I love you, dad. You're the best dad. So it's like a positive influence where Knox doesn't want to feel left out, but she's a positive influence on him. And so, but yeah, the note, I've got it in my house now. It's the best thing ever. Just, like I prayed for you. I'm so grateful to have you as my dad. And I'm like, Larry,
Dude.
like, she's my daughter. Like I just never imagined that. Memorial Day weekend, I had no idea this would ever happen. Um, so it's been a blessing.
That is unreal, man. That is unreal. I'm so happy for you. Like what a cool like gift for her to have you and your wife. And by the way,
Like,
my wife is Jessica as well.
it's
So
awesome.
yeah.
It's awesome.
And yeah, that's incredible, man. Um and you definitely answered the question because I was so curious. I was like, man, like that those are those ages that we were talking about that stuff. So it's so cool to hear that, and to hear that from another man and the fact that we all know how rewarding and how incredible it is to number one be called dad for the first time. Number two, to get these incredible notes from our kids, right? Which is so awesome. I want to go back and talk about your upbringing. You had a a very challenging upbringing, and even a mom that quite frankly, I believe she was told, right, that don't try to have kids, correct? And then she did, which was that was her choice and all that. And what an incredible choice and one out of bravery. But I would love for you to share what that journey was like for her and for you and even your own dad growing up.
Absolutely, Larry. And I just have to encourage anyone listening that there's parallels that, it was easy with Isabella because it was hard as a child. And
Yeah.
so, like growing up, I always thought if I have a chance to be a dad, I won't be perfect by any means, but I'm going to give unconditional love. I'm not going to need to receive. I'm going to do everything I can to show this little boy or little girl unconditional love and security and safety and just warmth. And so my mom was a great example of that. And how I was raised was a great example of how not to be. And so I saw a lot of me in Isabella, to be honest. And so, when we had this opportunity, my wife and I just said yes. And so a lot of that adversity that I had growing up gave me this unique perspective to be grateful in little things and be like, you know what? This will not be easy bringing an almost 10-year-old girl into her life, but she deserves the best life possible for her to have that foundation for her future. And the irony is, my strife in my life as a child actually almost made it easier to say yes, if that makes sense. But yeah, walking back, I'm almost 44, so this was 1979. My mom had multiple sclerosis, and she was warned that delivering this little boy would trigger it, and it did. She survived, thankfully, but it did paralyze her from the waist down. Um, so when I was 2, my father took me out of the house and remarried, and that just started a trajectory of a lot of neglect and a lack of much love in my own house. And so when I would visit my mom, Larry, I would only be there for 3 or 4 hours, 3 or 4 times a year. But when I was with her, she just looked so beautiful inside and out. And she was so cognizant and aware, because the disease only took her ability to walk. Like her mind was there, her heart was there, and there's so much love. And so I always would leave thinking, why can't I stay? Like what child doesn't want to live with their mom? How do you take a child away from their mom? As I got older, especially fast forwarding to when I was a husband and a father myself, I realized just how impactful and powerful it was that I can't recall a time she frowned. I'm sure she cried behind the scenes, but I can't recall a time she frowned, man. Like on the phone, in person, she'd see her only child. She always had joy. And as a parent myself, you as a dad yourself, could you imagine your only child being taken from you, just being left behind? But she never wanted me to see it. And I don't know if it was that she didn't want me to worry, or if she just was so happy to have a few hours here and there with her child. But I was on the phone with her, fast forwarding to when I was an adult. I was on the phone with her when I was 23. And I was reaching some worldly success, for what the world says. My mom says, David, I'm really proud of you. I'd love to see you. I grew up in New York City, but I'm living in DC at the moment. And my mom's still in New York. And I said, absolutely, Mom, I'm going to come visit you. Well, she died 2.5 weeks later. And, that was my one regret. Everyone has regrets. That whole expression, no regrets, that's a farce. We've all made mistakes. The goal is to not make them twice. And that just shifted my whole focus on life. It showed me my purpose, that if God puts someone in my life, I need to finish what I started. You know, um, this was put on my life. I'm going to make sure we do this episode. Isabella was brought into my life. I'm going to focus on my own marriage first. I'm going to focus on my own kids first. I'm not going to look outside the house before I've done everything I can inside. And the next time I commit to something, I'm going to follow through. So that's my one regret in life is the one person who showed me unconditional love, my mom, wanted to see her only child, and I waited a week too long. I waited a day too long, a minute too long.
Do you hold that? Do you hold that regret still to this day? I mean, is it heavy on your heart? I'm just curious.
It's more of a teaching tool now. Now,
Yeah.
when, now if I commit to something on the calendar, regardless if it's with my marriage, if it's with my boys, and now Isabella, my boys Kane and Knox, or if it's there's been some recent speaking engagements on the West Coast where flights again delayed and canceled, and I'm already booking new airlines, and it's not cheap, and it's messy, and sometimes I just got in at 3 in the morning at DC a couple weeks ago, and the host is saying, "Hey, we can reschedule." No, if I put something on the calendar, I'm going to follow through. It's a standard I live by now, Larry. And so, this trauma from my past that I think at times would trigger, like when I was writing the book, I think I'm in a really great place now where I use it as strength and teaching tools. But yeah, occasionally that regret will come back to remind me that if I put it on the calendar, I'm going to follow through. If God puts someone in my life, I'm going to pour into them and give them everything I can. And I'm not going to look outside my house. I think that big thing of not looking outside your house hopefully resonates with a lot of men listening because we look at like, why isn't our marriage like that marriage? Why are my kids doing what they're doing? Why aren't I succeeding in the marketplace? And I thought my mom had 40 more years, Larry. And so I've learned not to wait until tomorrow if I put it on the calendar.
Can I just share just a response to that? And I want to be really, really careful. But it's just something that it's on my heart as you share that, and I feel the need to share it with you. Are you cool with that?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, cool. Um, from dad to dad, right? We both raise boys. You obviously now this daughter, right, Isabella. But I think for our kids, right, as we raise kids, you raise kids, I raise kids, everybody listening to the show raises kids. And as we raise our kids, right, one of the most valuable things that we want for them is not a mistake-free life, because that is 100% impossible. But it's like, what do you do with those mistakes?
Right.
I've had experiences, I'm sure you have too, where we see our sons, or your daughter, and we see them make a mistake, and then they harbor that, and it eats them alive, and then it almost impairs them to actually move forward, and it actually holds them back from the life lesson to then pivot and then do something different down the road. I think we all want, like, hey, what was the learning moment here? Like, what did you actually learn from it? And when your kid can look at you and be like, yeah, that was a mistake. That was a huge miss, but here's what I'm doing different. And then you see them live within that differently, right? And you look at that as a parent, as I'm sure your mom does too, still to this day, shining down on you from heaven. She's looking at that, be like, what a beautiful lesson that you learned, son. Like, what an incredible lesson. I know that, the lesson came from this experience, but at the same time, like, we look at our kids with so much pride, and we're
Yes.
so proud of them when they do face plant, right? But
Yes.
do they get up and brush themselves off and be like, okay, lesson learned, now I'm doing this? Or do they just keep their face in the ground and be like, I can't believe I fell. I can't believe I fell. Look at how horrible it is, right? So I think just the thing that's emerging for me is like, good on you, man. And I bet your mom is just like, that's amazing that you've done that, and you've made that strong. You've staked this flag in the ground. If it's on my calendar, I'm doing it regardless. If I've said that I'm going to do it, it's my word. I'm doing it, right? And I'm not going to wait. That's an incredible lesson for not only you, but for me interviewing you, because that's a strong reminder for me, and it's great for our audience. So I really appreciate you sharing that personal story, man.
Thank you, Larry. And I also want to encourage all the listeners that putting it on the calendar also brings a peace because I've been in real estate for a long time and I still hear it today, but especially when I started back in '05, it's like, okay, you put that coffee with a friend on the calendar, but here's a buyer. You got to jump for that buyer. You put that buyer on the calendar, but here's a listing. You put that listing on the calendar, but here's a bigger listing. Here's $1 million listing. Here's a ready today buyer. And it becomes very transactional versus relational. And so it's not only if it goes on the calendar, it sticks, but it's like if it goes on the calendar, it sticks unconditionally outside of a personal emergency. And that's how you can live with integrity that, okay, I put it on the calendar, but here's a bigger, and I appreciate you, Larry. Like you could have had someone who has a bigger platform than me. Like, no, I'm going to finish with David. I'll go to this person later, and so we're similar in that marketplace. That if you commit to something, then you could just be true to where you are. You know, if my wife and I have a date night, I don't care how big the appointment is. There's nothing in the world that's going to make me miss my date night or be home. I've got a standard that I'm home by 5:30 at the latest for dinner. At 5:31, I tell my wife, "You start dinner because I failed you. You didn't fail me." And so it becomes such a big deal where I want my wife, I want my kids, and I want anyone who's in my life to be able to trust me and be able to know in a world that is so move dynamic and hostile at times and with so many moving parts. I want my kids to know they can rely on their dad. I want them to know, no matter how hard their day is, that I'm going to be home when I say so. And to your point, my wife actually has told me, David, I love that you make mistakes, but you don't make them twice. I embrace mistakes, Larry. I tell my older son all the time, hey, don't worry about that. What'd you learn from it? Don't worry about that. What are we going to do next time? I'm always looking forward. So you're absolutely right. We don't harp on the mistakes. We don't even focus on them at all. We just say, like, because they know, like, kids are smarter than I think we give them credit for a lot of times. They just haven't had the experience, but they have the mind and the heart. I'm always looking forward, like, hey, don't worry about forgetting that. Don't worry about that mistake. Don't worry about that bad grade. My sons get a bad grade in school. My daughter gets a bad grade in school. Don't worry about it. What can we do differently moving forward? Never harping on the mistakes, always focusing on the positives.
I'm I'm like completely taking notes here as you're talking. Like, so if you see me typing, I'm like, I love this. So I'm totally stealing that. You know, like I'm more long-winded with my kids. It's like, oh, it's not about the mistake, it's what you learn and blah 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 blah. But like, I love the fact that you're like, don't worry about that. What'd you learn? Don't worry about it. Like, because I think the whole "don't worry about it," because I think that's like if you can release that pressure off of a kid, like right away, like, dude, don't worry about it. What'd you learn? You know, versus like this monologue that you throw that a
Right.
lot of us want to throw at a kid. I love that, man.
Well, and
Well,
Larry, you know this as a dad. Your kids want to make you proud.
oh yeah,
And when we harp on the mistake, the challenge, they're just focusing inward on not being good enough. And I just want them to
100%.
know that they're always enough. And I don't want the enemy of good to be great. You know, we want excellence in the marketplace. We want excellence in our marriage. We want excellence with our kids, but not at the expense of moving forward. And so sometimes good is enough. And so I tell my kids all the time, like, don't even worry about it. Like, let's just move forward. We have to give our kids more credit than we do. I believe that sometimes we forget that they see a lot and they just don't know how to articulate it. They feel a lot and they don't know how to share it. And so when my kids make a mistake, you can almost tell, you know what they're thinking. They already know it. You don't have to harp on it. Just like in a marriage, right? Like, I'm not going to go home and tell my wife the one thing she's doing wrong. I'm going to try to encourage her on the three things she's doing right and then just move forward, step over the offense, stop keeping score, and just focus on all that's good.
I love that, man. Focus on, what it is that we want versus what we don't want.
Yes.
We always say in our community, what we focus on grows and what we focus
Yes.
on expands. So if we're focusing on all, like, so for instance, like you, like if we focused on the regret of that situation you were talking about with your mom versus like, what do I learn here? What do I do different for
Yeah.
literally the rest of my life? That becomes the focus and that's what expands. I am curious before we move on to your book, what was it like growing up with your dad? And I'm just curious. I mean, you kind of breezed over it, that he, after like when you were two, like he left and like
Yeah.
got remarried. And I'm curious, I'm just going to kind of like throw things out here with me. Cause my father did the same, but I didn't see him after that at all. Like he completely like left. And the part of me that's just curious as to growing up and spending time with your mom, spending time with him, was there ever any part of you that's just like, dude, like, why did you leave? Like, why did you break up the family over this? I thought this was for better or worse, for sickness and in health. Or was it like, was it different? Like, I don't really know what happened.
Yeah, definitely. So, um, when I was a child, my father was in and out of mental hospitals, and then he was at the house, and then he left when I was 11 for good. And to be honest, my father, my stepmother, it didn't really matter. I didn't feel love. I didn't feel safe. So to be honest, Larry, I had this like self-preservation mode as a child where at 8 years old, I'm raking leaves to make money. I'm shoveling snow growing up in New York City. I'm washing cars. I actually didn't have a lot of time to be a victim. I was more mad at God. I was more thinking, like, I hear about this amazing God. Why is he taking me away? And why is he allowing all this? Um, you know, as an adult, on one hand, I'm disappointed in how my father lived and led, or a lack of leadership, but it also taught me how not to be. And so I just don't believe in harboring ill will towards people. I believe in forgiving, but not forgetting, and not keeping. And so tough relationships are okay, but toxic is not. And so if it's toxic, I pretty much just say internally, like, thank you for showing me who you are. Thank you for giving me this clean divide, this clean cut, so I can just have the best healthy life for my three kids and my wife and myself. And so I don't spend a lot of time looking, because men make bad gods. We can do the best job we can, but men do make bad gods. And so I just, for the longest time, I was telling a story about why he left. Like, he had to, so my mom would have what she needed to take care of herself and pay for aids and everything. And that was kind of like a coping mechanism of like why my dad took me away. And as an adult, I know the truth, that we all make mistakes. Some are minor and some are major. And so I guess the best answer I can give, Larry, is I just look forward on being the dad that I wish I had.
God, you and me both, brother. You and me both. So is he still with us today?
Yeah, he's still
Is,
alive. We don't really have much of a relationship. Um, and you have a peace around you too. It's a positive, man. You just have like this sweet peace around you. I'm sure your family and your friends who know you well can see it and feel it, and you just have a peace around you, which I really appreciate.
I really appreciate that. I don't have many gifts. Um, but one thing I've been told is that I'm calming,
Yes.
and people tell me they can share anything with me, which I don't know where that comes from. I grew up too with a really crazy, upbringing with my own father. And I agree with you that, forgiveness and holding grudges, that's for the person who holds it. And it could be a toxic disease if we hold on to those things. Like, I was reunited with my dad when I was 12. He left again. Really sucked. I ran into him by mistake when I was 30. Here we are 18 years later. We have a relationship. Many people over the years have asked me, like, dude, like, how in the world do you let that guy back in your life and like with your family? And I'm like, well, I don't know if you are familiar with Gary John Bishop, but he just wrote a book,
Yep.
yeah, called Grow Up and, become the parent that your kids deserve. And he really paints this incredible picture of what our parents probably were going, because like every single child and every single adult child will have good things and trauma, no matter how great you
Right.
try. Like my kids tell me to this day, like my older one's like, you're such a good dad. I'm like, careful. I was like, I try. I was like, but trust me when I say, like, you have your own kids, you're going to have your own bag of goodies that I left with you. And
Right.
you're going to look back and you're going to scratch your head and be like, what the heck, dude? Trust me. I appreciate the kudos, but that day's coming. So, but the thing that, and even my own kids have asked me, like, how can you forgive your dad? And the only way I can describe it is I've told my 15-year-old, because he asked me the same thing, is I'm like, listen, son, I was like, you'll learn this. And if you haven't already, but the story I'm telling myself is you probably already know this. I'm just saying it out loud and you're putting the pieces together. But, holding a grudge is a lot like drinking poison and hoping the other person will die.
Yeah.
It does you no good. It does you absolutely no good. One of the most freeing and incredible things is to forgive that person and to give them grace. And I totally, totally, totally agree with you can forgive and you can not forget, and that's fine. But I also think like there's people that you forgive and you make a decision of like, okay, this person's just not going to be in my life because
Don't.
there's a lot of toxic elements, right? And I have, my mom unfortunately is one of those people, like tons of, and it's actually not even safe for my kids to be around her. And I'll leave it at that. But I've told my kids, like, there's an incredible thing with forgiveness. I was like, listen, my dad had me at 25 years old. he had just gotten out of Vietnam. He was moving all over the place. He had PTSD. My mom and his relationship, they got married when they were 20 years old. They had all kinds of marriage issues. Like they fought all the time. Like I think my dad was a lost young 25-year-old, had no clue what the hell to do. And he literally was like, I should probably leave because I'm doing more harm than good. And he tells me to this day when he signed over parental rights to my mom's husband when I was 4, that that was the darkest, worst day of his life, but he thought he was giving me a better life. Now, what I was told, right, growing up was your dad signed you over. He didn't even want you. That wasn't the real story. There's always two stories, right? But then I look at even like my dad when I was 12, when we had this relationship, he was remarried, had a 2-year-old son, another one on the way. And he kind of he was 35 at the time. And he was like, hey man, it's me. It's not you. I really can't do this right now. And my dad will tell you still to this day, he's 75 years old. He was like, that was the worst mistake I've ever made in my entire life. Worse with that was leaving you the first time. The second time was even worse. He's like, and then I just literally was like, what the hell did I just do? But at the same time, he was getting, I think there was a lot of pressure going on in his life. He was trying to start a business, trying to raise a family, trying to start over. And all of a sudden this 12-year-old comes right back into his life. And he's like, what the heck do I do with this? And so I honestly believe, like you and me and everybody else, we make mistakes and you either learn from them. And I actually give my dad a crap ton of kudos right now because he knows all the books that I've written, the podcast I do, a lot of it had to do with the experience that I had not having him around. And dude, my dad will never, like, he doesn't allow that to come between us. He still shows up to my kids' games. We still have conversations. Like, and I look at him like, God bless, you are really, really strong because like we do have a good relationship now. We really, really do. But I also know that in the background, he fully knows that everything that I'm doing has to do with, well, a lot of it has to do with what happened between he and I, but yet he still shows up, which I admire him for that. Like, that's like, damn, dude, that's strong, right? But so I just want to add it. I wanted to add that in there because I do think that there's this forgiveness piece because a lot of guys out there, and you know this as well as I do, David, that there's a lot of guys out there walking around with this childhood trauma of what they did get, what they didn't get, and all this other stuff. And they're holding it and holding it and holding it. And it's what's actually happening is it's like, it's eating away at them and it's eating away even at the relationships that they currently have now. And the stories that guys like you and I tell ourselves, we either say, no, I'm doing it different and here's how I'm doing it. Or we live in the camp of like, well, this was done to me, so there's no hope for me. And I think your story really shines a light on, no, you can actually make a different decision and move in this direction, which I love.
Yeah, Larry, that's so encouraging. And honestly, personally, it's very encouraging because as I go through this journey, sharing my story, that is a hope that I have for my father and I, that one day he can see that, okay, that was a tough season. Maybe I made mistakes, but it's helping others through the story that David shared. So I really appreciate that, Larry. It
I
took many
appreciate you
years
back.
for me to have a piece around sharing my story because I just felt called to encourage other dads out there that everyone has a story. And to your point, I want to encourage them to not use that as chains, not use that as anchors to
Right.
hold them down. Um, but I can really appreciate the fact that you and your father are back on track. And then now he's looking forward and he's like, look, Larry, like tell the world because I was that guy, but now I'm going to be there for your boys. Now I'm going to be there for you. You know, you nailed so many. This is great. I'm going to rewatch this later because, you always receive when you give, right? And I'm going to learn more than anyone else on this podcast just from what you've been sharing already. You're so right that when you harbor ill feelings, you're the one that's sick. The other person already made mistakes, and you either need to forgive them and then move towards improving the relationship and learning from them, or just cutting them out. And if you cut them out, hopefully it's because it's toxic. But if it's tough, you keep going. It's okay for tough relationships. Anyone that works out, it's supposed to be tough. If you don't have sore muscles the next day, you didn't work hard enough. So we're not called for bliss every day. Tough relationships are actually healthy. Toxic ones are not. So that's awesome that you guys are back on track, and I love it. I'm so
Thanks, man.
supportive of that.
Thanks, man. Dude, I already feel like we're like best friends. This is I could talk to you all day long, man. I do want to get into your book though, because relationships over rules, 7 principles to lead gracefully and generously. And judging by your past and like this incredible book that has come out of it, I'm like, wow. Wow, right. I mean, this is huge. But I would love for you to share your past, right? My past, right? It's a big, big thing. And a lot of us, we look in that rear view mirror for like the breadcrumbs of like, well, what is my future going to hold? Because a lot of it's all back there. Yours is a bit different where our past doesn't have to necessarily dictate our purpose, right? So I would love for you to speak to the guys out there. And if I was listening to our interview right now and it was 10 years ago, I'd be sitting here in the car being like, well, this is all the reasons why I can't have a successful marriage. This is all the reasons why I'm not a patient father. These are all the reasons why I can't clearly communicate. But you, like me, we've learned over the years that our past doesn't have to dictate our future. But I want you to dissect that for us.
Yeah, absolutely, Larry. And it doesn't define our purpose either. That's not who we are. Just because we go through a season doesn't mean that's who we are. Um, for me, um, I felt a lot of pain just like you did growing up. I felt a lot of loss. Recently, someone asked me why I have such a value of relationships, why I put such value on people. And it was an easy answer because I never had any. You know, when I was a child, I went through things, and when I share the stories now, yeah, I drank toilet water because the bath water made noise, and the babysitter said he left his room. But the toilet water, I remember it vividly like it was yesterday. It didn't bother me. It quenched my
Wait,
thirst.
are you being serious?
Oh yeah, it was in the book. But I remember one day the babysitter was asked, "Did David leave his room?" And she said, "Well, yeah, I heard the bathwater running." I was like, "Okay, okay, what do I do now?" And so I was like, "Okay, the toilet water is sedentary, and then after I'm done, I can just flush the toilet. Not a big deal. No one's gonna think anything of it." Um, and even with the food, like the cookies and bread are being counted in the kitchen, but the kernels of dog food in the basement are not. But see, for me in that season, it was just survival mode. It was just this is what I do. And so back then I just felt less than. That's all I felt. There was never malice, maybe towards God, but never towards a person. There's more of sadness in that season. And so I never really harbored anything. It was more of just reminding myself that that's not a referendum on me and that I am enough. And so now, Larry, I use it as positives, that perspective that, yes, I don't want anyone to live on dog food or toilet water, but you can. There's people in countries right now that toilet water is purer than anything they're ever given, and that dog food is healthier than what they live on in many countries in this world. And so there's a perspective that I was given that I'm very grateful for today. And so I don't want my kids to ever live like that, but I also realize I don't need a lot. And I hope my kids can see that too, that I want to focus on giving more and taking less. Not having much love, that 3 hours every few months with my mom was gold. And so any time I have with my wife is so precious because I just never had any. And so, like you've shared with your relation with your dad, just because you didn't have in the past, you're not going to harbor those feelings to continue that. You're going to be a bright light for your father. And as long as he is for you and your boys, you're going to continue allowing him there. And so for me, it's actually a gift, Larry. Everything that I faced growing up is such a positive for me now. When there's a tough season, I'm like, okay, I can overcome. I know what I came through. I know what I overcome. What my mom sacrificed to bring me onto this planet, I never made that kind of sacrifice. And so it almost is easy. Don't get me wrong. I have my insecurities like every male, I'm sure, and every person for that matter. But then I'm reminded that God has a big plan for all of us, and that I'm called for so much more. And I just want to be a positive example. And I want my mom to be proud. So when I get to heaven one day, she's proud and she's dancing. She's out of her wheelchair, and we can just hug again and just rejoice. And she could tell me about all the times she watched me, and I can just remind her of everything that she did for me, even from a distance. And so for me, it actually almost fuels me to be the example that I wish I had. Um, and again, it's almost easy. It's not tough. It's tough internally at times because I have my moments where I think, well, maybe I deserve to everything that I faced. Maybe I'm not good enough. I've got hypersensitivity from an emotional quotient standpoint because I never want someone to ever feel less than. I always felt less than. I used to always try to hurt myself to remove the pain. And so now I realize that no one's perfect. So I don't harbor any ill feelings, but I also give myself grace, but I do it for others first. Um, that perspective, though, Larry, just to tie a bow around it, that perspective of adversity that I faced as a child, it just gives me like this armor of God that, like, no matter what we're going through, no matter what season we're in, either on a macro scale or in my own household, I know it's going to pass. I know it's going to pass. And so sometimes I actually worry that my boys have like entitlement. Sometimes I worry my boys just haven't faced much adversity, and you don't really want it as a dad for your boys or for your girls. But sometimes I think, like one time my older son said, "Seriously, mom, this is definitely not filet." My wife had made this beautiful meal, and it was like sirloin and pasta and salad. And I ran to get a can of dog food, and I was like, "Babe, I'm not going to give it to him, but I'm going to eat it right in front of him. I'm going to show him that, like, be grateful for your sirloin because your dad ate this, and it wasn't even in a can." And I didn't do it. I didn't want to traumatize him, all kidding aside. But my wife laughed because she knew that I'm past it. There's no trauma still built in. But my son didn't know any better. He doesn't know that some people don't eat sirloin, right? He's like, well, why isn't it filet? So I guess, I guess the best thing that I can encourage any dad out there is that their junk is their junk, and it's okay to be sad at times, and for it to have weight. It should have some weight. But I also want to encourage them that that was yesterday. That was this morning. That's not tomorrow. And just like you can rid yourself of old clothes and you can take a shower and you can cleanse yourself, you can rid yourself of toxic relationships and you can start fresh. And it's never too late. And so I just want to encourage people that there's so many gifts. And by the way, when you said earlier you don't have many gifts, you've got many gifts. And one of them is humility, that you're looking outward more than inward. But I told you right away that you had this peace or calming, they mean one of the same. And that's huge, man. In this world with what's going on in Israel today and with the pandemic and with trafficking and so much horrific, ill times that we're all facing or many are facing, being a calming presence first in your own household and then for others, like on this call, and for your friends and even for your father, that's one of the greatest gifts that any of us could have, is that peace and joy.
That's awesome, man. And I apologize. I missed that part in your book as I was paging through it. You actually drank toilet water and ate dog food?
Yeah, I did.
Is Can you expand upon that? Like, were you not fed, or what was going on?
Yeah, I tried for years to not tell the story. I was like, maybe I'm embellishing, but no. I kept trying to like think of it in a different way. It wasn't even a big deal for me. I just wasn't allowed to leave the room all hours of the day. There's only certain times I could leave the room, and I couldn't eat without it being a meal. And in the meals, it was kind of few and far between what I was given versus the family. Um, and again, for me, it's just a perspective thing where I'm grateful now for little things because I realized what I lived on. Um, as I got older, that's why I was raking leaves and washing cars and shoveling snow, because I'd make some money. I'd go to the convenience store and buy myself some food. And then my neighbor was a baker, so once he started realizing, he'd give me baguettes, and I would take a baguette behind the garage, and I eat like two of them before I walked in the house after school. And so as I got older, I started learning how to fend for myself. And so again, for me, yeah, I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but at the same time, it gave me a work ethic. It gave me perspective that can't be taught.
Wow, man. That is unreal. You talk about these things that were survival mode. Things like that weren't as extreme for me growing up, but I was left on my own for, a lot, even as a young age. I have a 9-year-old right now, and I really wouldn't think about leaving him at home by himself and getting him to like cook dinner and stuff like that by himself or figure it out. But like that was the message, growing, because my mom would work, she was actually working and going to school, which she was working hard at the time, but she was rarely home. So I was always fending for myself for dinner or trying to figure out something. Like I kind of the same as you, like I really didn't know how to cook a whole lot. So I would do certain things like rake leaves and stuff like that. And I would save up a little bit of money so I could get So on the nights my mom was at school, I'd have enough. I'd have $8 to order a Domino's pizza because at the time they were only $8, and that was for delivery and everything. But yeah, I can't imagine like that's just unreal to me. And you mentioned in there too, and then I want to get to the next topic in your book, but cookies were counted. Is that what you said? Like food was counted?
Yeah, well, cookies, slice of the bread. And so I had to get creative. And that's why I went to the dog food. And Larry, I want to encourage you. You lead this Dad Edge Alliance. You have
Right.
taken what you've learned and you are saving marriages. You are helping so many little sons and daughters by helping these men. And so you're right where you need to be. And so everything you went through at 9 years old and through your childhood and adolescent years, you're paying that forward to thousands and maybe hundreds of thousands of men, and then they will pay it forward. So what a legacy! And I know your dad is so grateful that you gave him another chance, and how proud he is that you broke those chains yourself. Because what a difference you're making, my friend.
Well, man, I humbly appreciate that. Which actually, before we get to the next point in your book, I want to ask your opinion on something because I'm so curious about it because I was in this camp for a long time as well. When I say this camp, like the mentality that I'm about ready to lay out for you. Because what you just said is what we've been saying on the podcast in our community now for probably the past year is that the work that men do, so like our age, right? Me, you, the guys who are raising kids now, right now, the work that we decide to do or the work that we decide not to do is going to be a legacy impact. It's going to be literally a legacy. So the next generation, the work you decide to do or not do, you're going to see that trickle into your own kids. You're even going to see it trickle into your grandkids, right?
Yes.
And a lot of men will look in the mirror and say, well, and you talked about the Dad Edge Alliance. That's our mastermind community. We've been doing that now for 7 years. And a lot of guys, when it comes to like, okay, I'm going to do this or I'm not going to do this, they'll be like, I just don't have the time. Or, it costs money. I don't want to spend money. Or, think this is the best one I've heard yet. And by the way, this used to be me, 100%. It's not that bad yet. And my response to that is, why are you going to wait till it's bad? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I get it. Like you're talking like the guy who's on this microphone right now, like 15 years ago, I would tell my wife, we are not going to therapy. Therapy is for broken people. Okay. And we're not broken yet. When we're broken or when problems get really bad, then we'll go. And I look back on that and I'm like, you are an idiot. Like you probably could have saved yourself so much grief and so much trouble had you been more proactive versus reactive. But kind of like you, I look at that as like, well, learn that lesson,
Yeah.
not doing that again. But I would love for you to just share your perspective on like the men and not seeing that big picture.
Yeah, definitely. So first and foremost, you have to know your purpose. And historically, men find their purpose in their identity at work. And
Work. Yeah.
they do something to move the needle, to sell more widgets, to get the next promotion. And they can quantify their purpose and success of the world if they're moving up the corporate ladder at work. At
Yep.
home, their wife is there, their kids are there. They can't quantify the difference at home. And so at work, they can get promotions, they can get their words of affirmation, they can get the little plaques. And so they just move up the corporate ladder. But one day they either get to the top or they don't. And either way, it's empty. So a couple things. One, you know, I used to as well, like you said, I used to think, okay, well, things are okay, things are good enough. But I've learned that I need to hold myself to the highest standards, but not expect others to live up to my own expectations of myself. And so I want to be the best husband that I can be. I want to be the best husband that my wife deserves. I want to be the best father I can be. I want to be the best father that my kids deserve. But I'm not going to expect others to live up to my own expectations of myself. Then I'm going to focus on 3 minutes being present with you in 3 years. And if I fast forward 3 years, which is how I said yes to this little girl, then I can walk back what I have to do in the next 3 years. And so my purpose is that if God puts on my life, I'm going to leave them better than I found them. And so good enough is for my kids. It's for my wife. It's not how I treat them, but it's for me not to be a judge. Anything that my kids do is good enough, because I know their heart, and then we can focus on improving for next time. Anything that my wife cooks is good enough. She's a very good cook, so they're all great meals. But to be honest, Larry, it doesn't matter. The thought you put in is good enough. When my kids give me a hug, it's good enough. Like, it does not matter what we do on a date night with my wife, it's good enough. It doesn't matter what a friend says on that text or that call. He just did it. She just did it. It's good enough. And so I've learned my marriage has improved as I stopped expecting my wife to live up to my own expectations of myself. But also, I hold myself to the highest standards that I can because I have some level of control over myself. Fast forwarding more than 3 years, I think 3 years is a critical number and it's biblical, but also because 1 year is not enough and 5 years is too far out there. I'll get to that in 5 years. I'm going to do that in the next 10 years. It's a safe place where it's too far away, Larry, that you never have to hold yourself accountable. But then 1 year is not enough time. So when you don't reach it, you can just blame the lack of time. But 3 years is just enough that you can put it out into the world and then move towards it. You want to do a Ironman. Well, you better be doing a marathon this year. You better start riding this year. You better start swimming this year. When it comes to marriage, I want to be the best husband I can be. And so I love counseling. I love therapy. I'm always wanting to talk to people. I'm always telling my wife, tell me what I'm doing wrong. Like, I want to fix it. I want to fix it. With my kids, I don't want my kids to be excellent. I want to be an excellent father for them because it can't be taught, it has to be caught. And then to your point, I can leave a legacy where they can be the best versions of themselves. And I was hopefully a positive example. And so as I get older, Larry, what I'm learning is not to control every outcome. I used to have this problem where, and even my wife would say, like, I'm not going to talk the way you want. I'm not going to say what you want to hear. I'm not going to do what you want. And over the years, I learned that what I wasn't hearing was I was trying to control everything. Not like maybe in a negative way, but okay, this is how my marriage should be. This is how my kids should be. This is how my business should be. I just want to lead by example. And so I do want to encourage the dads on this call that, and again, I'm learning when I'm talking or teaching. I'm the one that learns most. It's like a positive reminder and affirmation every day. I want to encourage them that they're meant for so much more, and that they just need to be their best and drop their guard, and that their brides are not going to penalize them for being honest. They're probably going to appreciate them. I think the best thing I've ever done in my marriage is just be authentic. You know, um, Choosing joy in the morning, choosing peace in the morning, and then being authentic throughout the day. Not trying to put on a good front, not trying to keep score, stepping over the offense, not looking at what one of us is doing versus the other, but holding myself to high standards and then expecting my bride to be herself, not me. Um, I think what happens in this world, Larry, is men forget their purpose and they get stuck in like, well, the Excel spreadsheet says I only have an extra $38 this month. The Excel spreadsheet says that I need to focus on work 12 hours a day this month. Maybe next month I'll have time for my kids. My job says that this Friday night business meeting is too important to miss. Maybe I'll do date night next week. And by the way, I don't need date night because my marriage is already here, but the job is not. I may lose my job. My marriage is always there. But to be honest, man, I don't care about my job if my marriage is floundering. I don't care about my business if my kids are going away. And so I'll do everything I can starting at home. Your home is your firm foundation. Your standards at home come first. If you have a healthy home, everything else has a fighting chance. If you have a dysfunctional home, if your marriage isn't strong, the kids are seeing that. If your marriage is strong, the kids are seeing it. So they're seeing it regardless or not. If your work is your top priority, then their kids are going to focus on work. The best thing that I've learned is to just be present where you are. For me to be present on this podcast, to be present in my business, to be present in my marriage, present with my kids, and then move on to the next space where I'm called to be and just give my all and give my all. Because when you give your best where you are, you can move on knowing you're not perfect, but you gave your all. And then that person can leave knowing, wow, Larry made me feel special on this call, which you are. Like, you're giving me an hour of your time. This means the world to me. And so I'm going to do the best I can by you. And then when we're done, I'm going to move on to what's next on the calendar. And so be cautious what you commit to, but then give 110%. And don't let money be a master. Don't let any idols or even targets or goals be masters. Just give your all where you are and then move on and don't look back.
I actually typed that quote down. If you have a healthy home, everything else has a fighting chance. That is so right, man. And so many of us, we chase the things where we get validation, right? The workplace, it's, one of the three needs of men is validation. It's respect, appreciation, validation. And the workplace is a great measuring stick for that, right? It's our relationships that are more subjective, and it's like the home front. And so like a lot of times that's where guys, like, I wouldn't say we necessarily check out, but we don't know necessarily how to check in, right? And we don't know how to measure those things. In your experience, I would love to know how we can actually measure those things. And while you think on that, we just came up with, for our community in our mastermind, it's called the 5 dials. It's a sheet that we use that measures, net worth is one, right? Fitness is one. I start with those 2 only because they're very black and white.
Yes.
You're either here or there, right? Now, for the family, one of the sheets is a survey that my family actually takes. It's 10 questions. Wow. Rated 1 through 5, right? 5 is 1 is never, 5 is all the time, 3 is sometimes, right? But it's 10 questions that your family answers about you. 1 is like, are you calm and patient in most situations? Do I feel that you're listening to me all the time and I have your full attention? Do you apologize quickly when you make mistakes? Things like that, right? But it's a way to gauge. It's almost like this.
Larry.
Oh yeah, I can send you the sheet. But it's a way that you can really start to measure, and you see the things like the way we tell our guys to use this is like, hey, use this as a way to have conversations, right? This isn't the score isn't the end all be all. So like, for instance, where you're doing really, really well, right? Well, now you have like, okay, I'm going to go double down on these because obviously they're really important. They're really effective. And I know exactly what I'm doing. And they've told me what is best. On the ones where we have opportunities to improve upon, like, I asked my family, like, one of the things that was better for me to improve upon was like, are you always patient and calm in every situation where there's chaos? And I got it sometimes. And I was like, well, hey, how do I get all the time? Like, what do I do? Yeah. It's like, what do I do? What is going on when things are really, really good? And what am I doing when things are just like, dad's like doing his thing? But that gives me a really good gauge and a target to be like, okay, this is a chaotic situation coming my way, and I have a choice. Which one am I going to choose? Am I going to handle it this way or that way? Because I know how it's being received out there right now. But I would love to kick this back to you and how we can be, how you measure these things in your own life, in your own personal life.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to answer that question of how to measure them, I think we have to walk a mile in our loved ones' shoes, and starting in our marriage and then with our kids. And, for me, I'm going to do everything I can, making mistakes along the way, to keep my marriage. I think men forget that the marriage can go away, just like their health can go away, their finances can go away, their kids can go away. You know that, I know that. You went away, and fortunately, you're able to come back. But the marriage can go away. You don't want that. And so you want to court your wife after 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, just like you did on day one. And so the marriage needs to be that important. Your kids can leave you once they're older and they can move on with their lives. And so you need to show them love, TIME, and you have to give them that time. So, men tend to give their time to their job where they don't want to lose it, and their time to the job where they want to get promoted. But they don't look at how to save and get promoted in their marriage, where their wife wants to spend more time with them, where the wife looks at them as the keeper of the house and looks at them as a provider and security blanket for them, where the wife feels safe and says, wow, I'm married to my best friend. You know, we kind of take our kids for granted, and then the kids get older and they can make more decisions on their own, and they don't come back, and they don't come back for holidays, and they don't call when they're in a struggle or a celebration. And so the best encouragement that I can share is the last person I want to lose is my wife. And so that's where I attempt to put my focus first. The next last I'd love to lose or would ever imagine losing are my three kids. Then it is some of my friends and colleagues at work. And then it's others that have been put in my life. And so that's where my attention goes. But I think the world wants us to flip it. You know, your wife's never going anywhere. Your kids are with you for life. It's your job you have to focus on. But we focus on our bodies and our health because they are important. We don't want to lose them, and we don't want to lose our life if our body gets too bad and our heart stops. We don't focus on our wife. We focus on our life, but not our wife. But can you imagine a life without your wife? Could you imagine a life without your kids, your boys? We say we can't imagine a life without our house. We can never want to be homeless. We can never imagine a life without our job. We can never imagine being jobless. But we never think about what it would look like if we lost our bride. We never think about what it would look like if we lost our kids. And so, like you said earlier, what you put your focus is what expands. And so, yeah, if men put even a fraction of the attention on their marriage that they put on their jobs, if men put even a fraction of the attention on their kids that they put into their finances, not only would they have better balance, but they would actually have security around their marriage for the long haul. Because one day our kids will be grown, and when our kids are grown, you want your wife to look at you as your best friend and say, now we have more time with my best friend, versus looking to their best friend. Either you're their best friend or someone else is their best friend. I want to be my wife's best friend. I want to one day be my kid's best friend.
I love that, man. You want to hear something kind of
Yeah.
fascinating from just a, so I put and by the way, I stole this social media post I put on from Stronger Marriages. So shout out to Stronger Marriages. I love their platform. But the post was dating our spouses got us so close and intimate that we wanted to marry our spouse. And then after we got married, the dating went away. Why is that? And I looked at that post and I was like, oh man, that's really good. And then I took it and I posted it on my own stuff and I posted it in our groups and stuff like that. And, you know, the interesting thing is I would say probably 50-50, the comments. They got a crap ton of comments. But 50% of them were like, no, I still date my wife or I still date my husband. Married 25 years. We'll never change that. We have to be pursuing each other. We have to put our marriage first. We have to, like, for the kids' sake, for our sake and everything, right? And then we had other people that were like, well, I don't. And they were defending it all day long. Well, we don't have the time. Well, you know, one guy actually said this, which I thought was comical. Yeah, dating was easy when we were in college, but as soon as you have something called a mortgage, car payments, and kids, that's no longer a priority. And I'm like, wow. And I had one lady, one lady was like, laziness and complacency. And oh, by the way, when you leave your poop stained underwear on the floor of the bedroom, that's a huge turnoff. I don't want to date you after that. I was like, oh my God. I started dying laughing. But it is true. I mean, there's a lot of people, you know, Jessica and I just put a post out not too long ago. This was this past weekend because we have a bi-weekly date night that we do not negotiate. Like it's every 2 weeks minimum, sometimes every
Yep.
week. And I took a lot of the excuses that people, you know, put up there and I was like, no, this is not right. Because it used to be our excuses as well. Like these excuses used to be ours. Was like, well, we're so busy raising four boys that we don't have the time. There's 168 hours in a week. If you don't have 90 minutes to carve out, you have time management issues. Like that's a problem. You know, we don't have the money. Well, you can go for a hike and go get a Starbucks coffee for $5. You know, like things like that. You can go make these things work. Well, we need somebody trusted to watch our kids. All you have to do is reach out and, you know, there's care.com. You have your in-laws, you have your parents, you have the kids up, you know, you have the trusted teenager up the street, you have a trusted adult, you know, whatever it is, whatever story you're telling yourself about childcare, you can work around it if you look hard enough. In fact, in this day and age, I would argue that it's never been easier
Yes.
in the history of the human race to find somebody to watch kids that's highly qualified with background checks and the whole 9 yards. So as we end off here, I would love for you to end off on one thing. It sounds like your number one priority is you and Jessica. My number one priority is me and Jessica. And the reason for that is, and I think society in itself is kind of torn on that one, because as soon as we become parents, it becomes kids, work, then marriage sometimes, right? But anyway, the marriage will take a back seat. But the way that Jessica and I view our marriage is, number one, we're the foundation of this house.
Yes.
And if we crumble, the rest of us will crumble. So we have to keep this intact. Plus, I feel my position on this is so strong. And that is, I have a responsibility to show these boys,
Yes.
these young men that I'm raising, this is how you love, honor, appreciate, and respect and communicate with your wife. And this is a functional relationship, right? And my wife feels like this massive responsibility of like, I'm setting the bar really high. This is how you treat a man. This is how you love a man. This is how you respect and appreciate him. This is how you talk to him, right? This is how you're affectionate with him. Therefore, when these boys go out and start dating, which they have, they'll be like, I'm not settling for someone who's going to treat me terrible, right? But I would love for you to just share those are my contexts around it, but I would love for you to share yours because it sounds similar.
Absolutely, Larry. We seem to have a lot in common, so I'm so glad we did this, brother.
Me too.
We all have the same, like you said, 24/7, 168. And we can prioritize what's important. And if it's your marriage, then you'll make time. And if it's not, then you won't. You'll make time for Netflix. You'll make time for work. You'll make time for whatever you want to make time for. And then you'll see the ripple effects, either positive or negative. But you nailed it, man, is that, first and foremost, I want to date my wife as long as I'm alive because I want to earn the right to stay married another day. And I'm grateful for that. And again, for me, that was the adversity that gave me perspective of not having loved ones around. And so I never want to lose what I have. Next, to your point with my boys, I want them to learn how to honor their bride, to respect, love, and cherish their bride, just like you said. And now having a little girl, I want to show this little girl how she deserves to be treated or not treated. And so to your point, that's our number one legacy. Our number one legacy is in our own home. Now, when the workday starts, if you've left your family in the best place possible to go to work, when the kids are in school, when Jessica's gone on with her day, then you can go to work and hopefully be a positive example there. But guys kind of seem to have it flipped. They're like, okay, I'm going to focus on work. And then when my marriage is struggling, I'll focus on that. And I'll focus on work. And when my health starts struggling, I'll focus on that. And I'll focus on work. And when my kids start struggling, I'll focus on that. But I'm going to focus on work. I want to be promoted to where, like I said, my wife looks at me as her best friend, the one person she knows she can always rely on. My boys and now my little girl look at me as a positive, bright light. And so you're doing a great job, Larry. There's no doubt. It starts with the marriage, with God in the center. Then it's the kids with God in the center. Then it's your neighbor. Then it's the marketplace. Wherever you are, if you're present where you are and you give your all there, the rest is out of your hands. And when something doesn't work, it's not a referendum on you. It might be a referendum on them or situational. Because hurt people hurt people. So I just don't want to hurt anyone.
Right.
I don't want to not focus on my marriage and my wife is hurt. I don't want to not focus on my kids and they feel hurt or they feel ignored or they make a mistake. I want to do my best and then move on to where I'm placed in next. And that's the best we can do, and then good is enough. And we don't want the enemy of good to be great. I'm not going to sit on the couch 24/7 with my wife and I wrapped in saran wrap to make sure nothing ever happens to one of us. But I just want to be present. And then my wife might say, okay, you're going to work, I'm going to Bible study, or I'm going to this school thing, you go here. And, in the first few years, we've been married almost 11 years, Larry. I'll leave you with this. In the first few years, I would tell my wife how much I loved her 24 hours a day. I would text her and I'd tell her how beautiful she is. And I would say this and say that. Eventually, she's like, just change the garbage can. Just take the garbage out. Get up with the kids. That'll show me how much you love me. And so I would start doing that. And then when I started doing that, she would say, I want date nights. I'd fight for date nights. And as soon as I stopped asking and I started just focusing on her and what she needs and deserves, then she would want to reciprocate. And so it's just human nature that people want to feel heard and respected, and who deserves it more than your bride and kids? We kind of give our best at work, and then whatever's left over happens at home. It's flipped.
I love that, man. You've given us such good perspective and such amazing content, man. I want to make sure that for guys who want to connect with you, and actually, guys, I highly encourage you to go grab David's book, Relationships Over Rules: 7 Principles to Lead Gracefully, Love Generously. This is an amazing topic, amazing book. It is going to do nothing but help you. And dude, I'm a huge fan of what you're doing. But for those guys who want to connect with you further, what's the best place to do so?
Yeah, man, either on Facebook. I don't do a lot of social media, but I do have a Facebook public page. That's great. Or just go to relationshipsoverrules.com and reach out. And I'd love to just sharpen iron with anyone, break bread, anyone that would love to connect, because we're all in this together, and we all have our stuff. I just want to encourage the men out there that they're doing a good job, to give themselves some grace, but also start at the house. Start at the house, put their own bride and their own kids first.
I love this, man. Gentlemen, you're not going to have to look far to connect with David. Head on over to thedadedge.com/Friday 129 for this show. Again, thedadedge.com/Friday 129. David, this was awesome. I feel like we could go for another hour. I feel like we've just scratched the surface, but maybe in the near future we schedule a part 2, because I'd love to get deeper.
Yeah, let's make it happen. Maybe I can come to St. Louis too.
Awesome, brother. Yeah, anytime, man. So would love to have you.
Thank you, Larry.
You bet.
Yes, brother.